Welcome back to Alimentos y Emociones podcast. Today we're talking to Pauline Oustric, who is an engineer in nutrition from Paris. Her background covers major challenges in nutrition from the field to the fork. Her professional experience as a nutrition consultant and a nutrition scientist has allowed her to operationalize her knowledge in nutrition for the food industry. However, while understanding the impact of the food system on health, she realized that she was missing a major determinant of food intake: food reward as a mechanism that guides our eating behavior through pleasure, liking, and drive to eat, wanting. Therefore, she built her PhD using a psychobiological approach to get a better understanding of determinants that drive what and how much we eat. Her systematic review was the first to examine changes in food reward during weight management, and she developed a protocol to culturally adapt the Leeds Food Preference Questionnaire, LFPQ, assessing liking and wanting for common foods. She got a grant to develop a prototype of the LFPQ online portal to standardize and facilitate the use of the LFPQ in free living and outside of academia. This has led to a research position as a chief scientific officer in a medical startup to fully develop this platform as an international standard to measure food reward in collaboration with the University of Leeds. She would like to use this platform with dietitians and clinicians to help patients understand and change their food reward and nutritional choices. In addition to her work as a researcher, her passion for communication has led her to design and conduct workshops on data visualization and networking for early career researchers. And lastly, as a keen interest in bringing people together to create a sense of community, either in the workplace and through leading associative projects for a better health. So we welcome Dr. Pauline Oustric, who is going to talk to us today about targeting food rewards as a weight management strategy. I'm also going to take a little bit of time just to tell you that this will be the last episode of this season. And I hope for those who have been listening that you have enjoyed this season on appetite, behavior, and weight. I look forward to bringing you more of these episodes at the beginning of next year in January 2022. And thank you all for returning. Please remember to subscribe to the channel. It's very important as well if you want to leave your comments, and press the little bell so that you know when the next episodes come. You can listen, and please share them with those that you think would really like to hear all this information, which has been so interesting to be able to share. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Alimentos y Emociones podcast. Thank you so much for listening to the previous episodes. I know it's sometimes complicated. We're doing them in English, but I think that, this whole season on appetite, behavior, and weight has been really interesting. And I'm really happy to share today this podcast, which will be on wanting, liking, and measurements of, food reward and weight management with Pauline Oustric. It's really, really nice to have you here, Pauline. How are you?
I'm happy to be here, and it's always a pleasure, if I can say, to talk about liking and wanting. So happy to be there.
Well, I think let's just dive right in. I'm going to start by asking you, what's your background? What was your study backgrounds? What did you study?
I think people will tell with my accent, which I'm trying to get from Yorkshire, but I'm French. So I am a nutritionist from background, so more specifically an engineer from Paris, so from Paris. And basically, what I did there was to study everything from the field to the fork. So how to make food, how to grow food, how to process food, and then what happened when you eat the food. So what the consequences on your health, epidemiology. So it was really complete, and I really enjoyed it, especially because I had the opportunity to do lots of internships. So I worked in companies such as Danone. I did some consulting in communication and health. I did some internship in research with elderly and eating behaviors. I also did some internship in farm. So it was really diverse and complete. So I enjoyed it, but I was missing something. I was missing the psychological part and the behavioral part. So I knew I knew how to eat and what was the impact of the food on my health, but I didn't know why I choose this food against another food. Like all the food choices part, all this behavior and neurological part, which I was interested in. So that's why I came to Leeds, first to do an internship, research internship, and then for my PhD. So I basically built my PhD with my supervisors on reward and weight management.
That's a really, really interesting path. I'd kind of like to know a bit more, from a dietetic background, I'd like to know a bit more about food production. I think that's missing a lot in like just general nutrition degrees. But how did you actually, were you doing the sort of research part at Leeds University when you first went there, or did you apply, were you somewhere else and then you applied directly to do your PhD with the particular group that you did your PhD with?
So basically, when you're French and you want to do an engineering school or master, you can do what is called year abroad. I don't know the real name, something like that.
Yeah.
And I wanted to have a vision that was more multidisciplinary because I'm really interested in putting together different fields. And that's where I discovered Leeds Psychology School, which is really famous for their appetite background, their food reward background, their energy control, everything around appetite and energy balance.
Yes.
Was a bit less known to me. I knew the physiological part, but I had less background in psychology. I had almost no background at all in psychology because I was a nutritionist. So I did a research internship for 6 months or 4 months during the summer, and I worked on food reward and physical activity, and that was so inspiring that then I wanted to do a PhD on food reward. But when you want to do a PhD, you need to find funding. So I basically spent the next 6 months when I was doing back to school for my master to find funding. So I did a pitch to find money. I went to companies. So it was really interesting to learn how to do this. And I was really grateful to get a grant from the University of Leeds to do my PhD. So I was lucky because I got the money to do the subject I wanted to do, which was understanding the motivation, the drive to eat, and context of obesity and weight management. And at the beginning, I will tell you more what food reward is, but at the beginning, I was really driven towards action because of my background of engineering. So I wanted to target food reward. So basically, I wanted to see whether we could change our way to eat. So can we change our pleasure? Can we change our motivation to eat? So we could reduce obesity, we could improve weight management strategies. So that was my focus. But of course, when you begin a PhD, you understand that it's really focused, and you need to first understand whether liking and wanting so food reward do change or not before trying to targeting them. So my idea was to target food reward to improve management, and then I focus more on what is the role of reward during weight management. So does it change and what happened? So that's my thesis now.
Okay, I'm going to take you back a bit, but I also just want to point out for those who don't know that, the School of Psychology in Leeds, led by people like Dr. John Blundell. I mean, really, really important people in the field of appetite. And if people don't know them, I mean, please, I will leave. Obviously, you know, a lot of the work that you've done and published has been with this group and, you know, with the group and with these people. So that's, I think, just an important, you know, thing to mention. Right. Shall we get into what food reward and liking and wanting are as, like, you know, definitions for those who don't know?
Yes, I think it's really important to begin with definition, because we always have different definitions in mind when we think about reward, especially because it's used as an umbrella term. So when I say food reward, some people say, oh, it's like when you give a sweet to a dog and then it will come and it has a reward. So people think about this kind of stuff, or they think about motivations or hedonics or palatability or cravings or pleasure or motivation. So there are so many words that are there that it can seem complicated, but we always need to come back to the roots to define a word. So reward, food reward, come back to reward. A reward is a stimuli that generates a positive experience. So when you think about food, taste is something that makes you eat because it's pleasurable. So taste is the main driver of food choice. But food reward is not restricted to taste. So food reward is an interaction between the homeostatic, so the inner drive to eat for the biological need, and the pleasure, so the reward circuitry in the brain, so liking and wanting. So it really, at the beginning, we were thinking that the homeostatics and the hedonics were separated, but the work from Berthoud, Blundell, Berridge have shown that it's really interrelated, and that we cannot separate them both. So to sum up what reward is, what food reward is, it's a process, it's a psychobiological process that can be separated into components. So liking, which is a pleasure, which is something subjective, which we can rate, verbalize, so the pleasure we have from the food in the mouth, and wanting, which is more a motivation, a drive, something inner, something a bit more implicit. So liking and wanting. But this work has been thoroughly investigated, and basically came from the work from Berridge. So that's Berridge worked on liking and wanting, and he basically established the independent liking and wanting in the brain. And then he showed that there were some psychological part of liking and wanting, but also learning. And then the team from Leeds, so psychology of Leeds, where I come from, so Gran, John Blundell, they have worked on operationalizing the liking and wanting from a behavioral point of view, and also to human, because the work from Berridge is fantastic, but it's mainly based on animals, at least at the beginning. So that's to give you a definition, that's food reward, liking and wanting. It came from the brain, then it was operationalized in psychology and behavior. It can be measured. And also the other things to know is liking and wanting have explicit and implicit components. So something explicit is something you can measure directly, you can see. Something that is implicit is something that is indirect. So you unconscious. So for example, to measure the wanting that is normally in the brain that you can't see because it's intervening variable, we use reaction times or an effort, something like that. So just to give a little perspective on that.
That is, thank you very much, because every time I read about it, you know, I have to really sort of sit and concentrate and to try and understand. And you've given a really just, you know, succinct, obviously from the expert's mouth information. So thank you. So right, so you start working, you know, on food reward. You start working on, you know, liking and wanting. How do you measure it? Maybe I was going to ask that later, but how would you measure it? And, you know, there's this questionnaire developed in Leeds and stuff to measure it, and how, and then we can probably dive into, you know, how you went about doing your work and your PhD.
Exactly. So in my PhD, I focused on the Lead Food Preference Questionnaire, which I will tell you is not a questionnaire, it's more than that, it's a task. So that's
a task.
That's
right.
how that's what I use to operationalize liking and wanting. But there are many other tools or questionnaires or tasks that measure liking and wanting. So when in my PhD, I did a review to explain the different types of methods that we're having. So basically, to measure liking, it's mainly explicit. So it's often questionnaire that ask how pleasant is the taste of the food. It's either visional scale or Likert scale. For the wanting, it's the same with a drive to eat, which is explicit. So that's for the explicit measurements. When you have the implicit measurements, there are mainly two types of methods. One is asking the speed of the response. So you want to understand the motivational choices between two types of food, for example. So that's reaction time. So that's what we use in the LFPQ, Lead Food Preference Questionnaire. But you also can measure the effort exerted to access to a food compared to a non-food or another food. So these two types of methods. And of course, you also have all the neurological methods, so EEG, PET, fMRI, which are important to underpin what is happening in the brain. So these methods are really important, but they are also kind of messy because it's difficult to compare between them and it's difficult to understand whether they translate into behaviors. So every method has its own limits. And I think that what will be the best is to compare different methods to see whether they underpin different facets of reward, different concepts, or whether they are related and correlated. So that's about the different types of methods. And to come back on the LFPQ, so I choose the LFPQ because it's a really simple task. It's quick and easy to do with your participants. And its specificity is to measure both liking and wanting for 4 categories of food varying in fat and in taste. And that's what makes it novelty, because you don't have only high fat food or snacks, you also have low fat food, which I've shown in my thesis are really important to measure, especially for obesity and weight management. And so you have taste, you have fat, and it also brings the dissociation between liking and wanting. And that's also a point that was demonstrated by Berridge. So to legitimate the liking and wanting measures, it's really important to measure both because they can be contaminated. And because in the brain, it's been shown that they can separate with different disease, obesity, but also other addictions. So it was important to replicate these findings with behavioral measurements. So that's what the LFPQ can do. And it's how it works is really simple. You have 2 tasks. One task is liking and wanting explicit. So you have one picture on the slide on the computer, and you rate how pleasant it is to taste this food right now. Really simple. And then you have another task, which is forced choice task. So you have 2 types of pictures, so 2 types of categories of food, and you have to choose as quickly as you can which food you most want to eat right now. And this translates the speed of the preferences and the motivation of eating one category compared to the other. So as you have understood from the methods, the liking is absolute because you have one picture, you rate absolutely what you like, and the wanting is more relative, is one food compared to another category. So one category against the other. So the results you will have is, for example, these participants have high liking for high-fat sweet, or they have higher wanting for high-fat sweet compared to all the other categories.
Right.
So that's how it works. So it's simple, but it's quite versatile because it can be applied in different contexts, in different labs, in different cultures, with different food pictures. Even you can change the categories, fat and taste. It's been used with protein. It's been used for anorexia, obesity, binge eating, for maintainers, for elderly people, young people, adolescents. So it's been used in different contexts, and that's what makes its strength, because it's been compared between studies. And And I will stop there, but one part of my PhD was to improve the methods. So that was not what I had in the plan in the beginning, but when I did my systematic review that I'm going to explain after, I discovered that basically everyone used different methods. And actually someone told me once this sentence, methods are like toothbrush. Everyone wants its own and nobody wants to use anyone else's toothbrush.
Yes, I understand that. So that's why there's different measures, so many different measures.
Yeah. So it's really cool. So when I did my systematic review, I could compare liking, wanting, but they use so many different methods, and sometimes it was even different definitions and different constructs. So it's hard to be replicable, it's hard to standardize, it's hard to compare. So that's why I basically developed a protocol to measure food reward using the LFPQ, and also to standardize its use in the lab and outside the lab, but first in the lab, and also to adapt it to different culture, because people think that, oh, language is enough, but linguistic translation is not enough. You have lots of things that needed to be modified and shifted. So I basically published a protocol to help every researchers that want to use the LFPQ to measure liking and wanting have all the steps they need to think about cultural adaptation. So the food are appropriate to the culture, to the time of the day, to the meal, to the population you are looking at, etc., to basically standardize the measurements and hopefully then being able to do meta-analysis between studies.
I think definitely, I think probably because of your background and coming from France and then going to, the UK and doing, this work, that you also have that understanding of, I've had a lot of difficulty as well in the sort of translation and adaptation of the questionnaires, because essentially, and some of them that I've tried to validate just don't work, because essentially it's just completely different cultures, So it's really, really, I really enjoy that part of your work, because just that systematic review hopefully will, has shed a lot of light, into this sort of work. So, okay, so once you did your systematic review, what was like the next step?
So just to give a bit more explanation on my PhD, where it came from. So I wanted to look at food reward during weight management. And as I've said, I wanted first to target it. But the first question is, okay, why do you need to target food reward? And it's because food reward is a driver of food intake. I think that's also one definition that I should have said at the beginning. Food reward is important to measure because food reward lead to what you eat behaviorally, lead to food preferences, food choices, and food consumption. And if it leads to food consumption, then it can be related to obesity and to overeating. Even though this relationship between food reward and obesity is still, there is still no consensus on it. It's still quite mixed in terms of results. But one way that you can think is, okay, let's start to change your relationship to the food, or you change the environment, or you could change the way you eat, so you could improve weight management. So my first task in my PhD, so I had three main parts. My first part was to understand with a systematic review whether different types of weight management studies, so weight loss, but also long-term weight loss, more than 12 weeks, could have an impact on liking or wanting, and whether there will be an interaction between the changes in reward and the changes in weight, for example, or their appetite. So that was the first part of my PhD. The second part was to coming from the conclusion of my systematic review to understand whether this could be replicated in a dietary study, so comparing two types of diet. And then the last part of my PhD was to step back a bit and trying to understand whether food reward was related to obesity and overconsumption from a more bigger picture. So systematic review study, and then another study on the cross-sectional. And the main result for my systematic review was that liking and wanting were mostly decreasing after different types of weight management. So not only some weight management study, but some interventions, but several. So diet, but also behavioral cognitions, not physical activity, but also pharmaceutical interventions. So that was the main results. And then that's where came my clinical trial to try to unpin the results for dietary restrictions.
Okay, now that is a big one, so we can get into that. How did you go about doing your study with the dietary part?
Yeah, so that was part of a big study. That was a grant from one of my directors, Christine Beaulieu, who got a grant to do a big study. So it was a clinical trial to compare two types of diet. So continuous energy restriction versus intermittent energy restriction, often called intermittent fasting. But here we're not measuring fasting, more the intermittent restrictions on appetite. And in my PhD, I focus on food reward and eating behavior, but that was part of the bigger study.
Yeah.
So to give you to make you picture this, it was more than a year. It was more than a year lab prep. So I was lucky to be part of all steps, because it's not always the case for PhD, but I was part of the design of the lab. I was doing the lab part, and then the analysis, and then the results and the publications, etc. But to go on the lab, which is what you're interested in, so the participants had to come every week. So first there were 3 measures days, 3 measures days. So one before they began the diet, after 2 weeks of diet, and then after 12 weeks. So it was a 12 weeks dietary intervention. It was a randomized controlled trial. So people were blinded, and we were also blinded to which arm they were in. And so I was responsible with my another PhD student, of the measures days. And in the measures days, you had measurements of appetite. So appetite, which means appetite sensation. So hunger, satiety, etc. So the form one. Of course, measures of LFPQ, so food reward, in the morning fasted, but also pre-lunch and post-lunch. We had measurements of body composition, so fat mass, fat-free mass in the lab with a butt pod. We had resting metabolic rate. What did we have? And then we had food intake, of course.
Yes.
We're giving them a breakfast, a quick breakfast based on their resting metabolic rate. And then after 3 hours, they had their lunch, which was ad libitum, so we could measure how much they eat. So yeah, that was a full day of a big day of experiment, and that was 3 times. And then each participant came back every week to see the dietitians. So that was Christine Beaulieu, and she was basically giving all the food to the participants. So that was the biggest part and the biggest work of the study. It was to feed the 46 participants every meal for the 12 weeks. So breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks.
Wow.
So
that's a lot of food.
Yeah, and lots of organization. So
yes.
Because she was dietitians and I was engineer, so we automatized this. I made an Excel spreadsheet to automatize everything. So to calculate how much they should eat per day, because they had energy restrictions, so 75% or 25%, depending on which arm they were in. So basically, it was ordering food from Sainsbury, then preparing all the food, so cutting it, chopping it, putting it in the good portion size, and then Christine will give it to the participants because we're blinded to which diet it was. So that was the biggest part, and that was the toughest part of the study.
Because you say 46 participants during 12 weeks, but of course it doesn't take 12 weeks. It takes more than that, because they don't all come on the same day and then you collect them for 12 weeks. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, no, it was long. And
a year.
Also drop out because some don't want to come back. And also that was for 12 weeks. And then we had a follow-up a year after, and only trying to remember now, only 18, I think, came back.
Yeah.
So we had 30 at the end, 40 at the beginning, 30 at the end, and 18. I need to check the numbers now.
Yeah, no, don't worry, that's fine. You know, anything close.
We can check what it is. But yeah, so, and also we did a baseline study because I wanted to understand how liking and wanting in women without obesity would compare with women with obesity and overweight. So I had a baseline study. But yeah, so it was a wonderful time. I really enjoyed my PhD because I've learned so much in terms of physiological skills and lab, and it was tough. I will not say the contrary. It was really tough, but it was really good for the learning curve. And in terms of results, I think what was really interesting was that this DIVA study, which was DIVA for dietary induced variability in appetite. So it shows that after losing 5% of weight, the women in the study decreased their liking, as shown in the systematic review, but not their wanting. And so it showed an association between liking and wanting. So we don't know the mechanisms because I didn't have enough power to calculate mechanisms, and also I didn't have appetite measures such as ghrelin or other hormones, or I didn't have neuroimaging, but I had body composition and food intake. And I think the point I want to make is food reward measurements are really important to measure to understand what's happening, but they need to be measured within a multidisciplinary
context.
Exactly. So with other appetite measures, with food intake, to see whether it correlates with food intake, and with weight. So yeah, it decreases liking but not wanting. And its effect size was quite small, so it wasn't a big change, but that wasn't something you would expect. You expect people to decrease their pleasure for high-fat food when they eat a diet supervised with 12 weeks intense supervision by dietitians. You don't expect them to like change everything by 50%. So around 10% change seems legitimate for this type of study.
That is an awful lot of work, though. That's really impressive. Well done. I mean, especially because, you know, it's easy to say, oh well, you know, wanting didn't change, but liking did change. Well, actually, that's quite, you know, it's very significant because you have the possibility of doing something, you know, in the clinical setting. So how do you see that playing out? And then what was, you know, the next part of the work that you did, which I think is really important?
Still in my PhD, you mean, or after my?
Maybe after. I don't know how much you covered in, you know, in the PhD or after, and what you're doing now. It sort of moves on to a next level. But
so
you know,
just to finish on the PhD, so I get the broader picture. I think what was interesting, I think the main originality of my PhD was to look at individual variability. So I went beyond the mean. I tried to, because means are often deceiving. You know, when you do average, you don't know what's happening in terms of individual changes. So I think that was the main surprise and originality of my thesis, was that I analyzed all my results at the individual level, and I could see that there were a huge variability in terms of changes in liking and wanting for each individual. So not everyone decreases their liking. Some women did, some in the average, they decrease their liking. But when I did, I've understood in the other podcast that you didn't like so much statistics such as PCA or stuff like that. But I actually quite enjoyed doing stats during my PhD. I didn't know anything about it at the beginning, and I taught myself how to learn how to do it. But I think
so did I.
The point I want to make from it is visualizing the data is so important. If I hadn't visualized my data in graphs, I could have not understood all what was going on. And because of that, I wanted to do a PCA, so a principal component analysis, to basically summarize the variability that was happening. And I could see that there were some patterns. So basically some people were decreasing both the liking and wanting. some were increasing their liking but not their wanting, and some were doing the contrary. So it was interesting to see that different things are happening. And in the future, I think the clinical implication from this will be to reproduce that, but with much more data, with like, this was clinical, now we need big data, that's big data set, and to understand whether this could help to phenotype people and to see whether we could tailor the intervention depending on the reward at the beginning, or depending on how they change the reward, to see whether they increase it, maybe we need to change the way we've done the intervention. So that's, I think, the big message that I learned from my PhD, is that individual variability is really important to look at. And then, of course, we need further studies to be able to interpret on that. But that's what I think interesting in terms of clinic and applying the research.
Yeah. But I mean, clearly that you wouldn't be able to do an intervention of that type, of the type that you did, on a massive number of people. I mean, you worked with 46, I worked with 1,000, because I was able to measure something in a more epidemiological way. Then when I did my intervention, I worked with 51 people as well. So you end up, I think that is something also important to say, when you work in the lab, you are restricted with the amount of, work that you can put into it in order to feed, people for 12 weeks.
No, exactly.
That doesn't, like you say, it would be great to do it in larger numbers to be able to phenotype it, but.
Exactly. But I think there's a need for everything. As you were discussing in your other podcast, you have a need for lab measurements because it's more specific, more precise, more control. So you will be able to go into the mechanistics part a bit more sometimes. But you also need bigger data set, genetics. So it depends on the questions you have. And also what is great is to put everything together. But yeah, the main messages from my PhD were that there are some relationship between liking, wanting, weight management, and appetite control. And reward is not something that is unitary. You need to think of liking and wanting, and this is really important. But also low fat and high fat, because people think they always try to focus on the high fat or high fat sweet part, but the low fat sweet is often underlooked and has lots of interest in terms of appetite. So that's why I think the main take-home message from my PhD, and that these variables need to be investigated within appetite control. But of course, bigger sample size are needed to take this message away.
I think you did quite well. I don't think anyone is worried about the fact that you didn't do enough work with your PhD, and that gives you enough, to be able to give you more ideas on what to do later, including what you're doing now. And maybe you want to talk about that, because I think all that app work is really interesting as well.
Yes, no, it was all related. So when I was doing my PhD, so between I think end of their second year or beginning of the third year, I've shared with you that I was interested in improving the methodology. So I was really inspired and interested in these methods and how we could improve it, standardize it. So first I did the protocol, and then I was thinking about how we could increase the impact of these measures outside of academia. So I basically applied for a grant. So I did a break in my PhD to make some 3 months of working on basically showcasing the impact of the LFPQ outside of academia. And that was such an inspiring job because I had to step back from the research. It was still research, but I had to be more, to look at it from a different point of view and say, okay, how could that be useful for other people? Like, how could we use this research to improve health, to improve weight management in the real life, to help patients? And so what I did was I tried to interview people that were using the LFPQ, but that were not researchers, because most of them, we have 100 publications with different countries, but we also have a few people that are outside of the academia. So fight for companies, but also the army that were using the LFPQ. So I discussed with the French and the American army, and I tried to understand why they were using the LFPQ and what for. And it was so interesting because I discovered that they were using the LFPQ in order to improve the energy intake, to improve the food consumption, the ration of the militaries, so they will not lose weight. Because we're always thinking about gaining weight, but for the army, it's the contrary. They want the guys to stay, the militaries to stay fit and healthy, so not lose so many weight with stress, with the heat, with the cold. And basically, the French army had shown that with this type of stress or temperature, the militaries were increasing their reward for sleep. And therefore, if you knew that, you could change their ration so they will not lose the weight, because they will be eating what they were needing on looking for, motivated for having. So that really brought me some ideas, and I thought, oh, it would be it. We need to bring this message that was basically developed by my supervisor. So I'm so grateful to him, because he developed this message during his PhD in Leeds.
Is that Graham?
Graham, yeah. He developed the LFPQ, so he developed the algorithm, he developed the method, he validated it. And then, so his PhD, now me, I wanted to bring it a step forward. So using it both in research, but also outside of academia. And so I've tried, so basically I applied to do a spin out, so which is a startup linked to the university. So I could still be a researcher and do research on LFPQ, but also on food reward, but also be having time for scaling up this method, but to an application online. So it will be easy to use, more friendly to use, because right now it's a software. So you own the software, it's not friendly, it's not easy to use, you don't have it on your phone. And also all the results, so more scientifically, all the results need to be computed. So behind the scene, Gran, we're basically spending lots of time computing all the data for each researcher so they could interpret the data.
So you need to automatize it, the analysis.
Exactly. So basically what I did was working with, so I did of what I wanted to sell and use for researchers and also outside of academia, which will be the LFPQ tool, but on a platform, but like
an algorithm.
Exactly. So the tool will be the same, but it will be much easier to use, much friendly. The data will be secure. You will have all the data appearing at the end. You could export it, and also you could visualize the data. So yeah, the idea was to make it more secure, more efficient, and more customizable. So having an admin portal, so researchers could say, oh, I'm from this country, I want to change this picture, or I'm interested in this time, so which protocol can I use? So I basically tried to think about how to make this possible, and I applied for the spin-out, but COVID happened, and and I got really ill for a long time. So I had to go back to France. I will pass on that, but it was a tough time. So this project basically had to stop because we had no money anymore. All the money was put back to COVID because of the stress at that time. And basically, because I developed long COVID, which is the multisystemic form of COVID, which lasts too long, unfortunately, I met other people and other startups in France that were related to taste and to medical tools. And by basically trying to get money from them as a president of the Association of Long COVID for research on long COVID, I shared my PhD in 3 minutes, just talking about what I was doing and assuring that I had this project and I wanted to do this platform that will be a international platform, standardized research tool, but that had lots of potential impact for dietitians, army, nutritionists, psychologists,
companies.
Exactly. So the main idea is to help people understand their eating behavior, So first it is a measure of what is there, and then the next step will be to understand which intervention you can develop from the results. But basically, I shared that with him, and I was really lucky because I got employed to do my startup. So I've basically been hired to develop this tool that I wanted to do in Leeds. So I'm still going to do it with Leeds because that's where I'd come from, and I really want to keep doing research.
Yes.
And so basically what's going to happen now and what's happening now is I am a director of research of this medical startup, and I develop this food preference questionnaire platform for researchers, and it has to be, I want it to be open science for all the researchers, so it will be free for the researchers, but we'll be selling it to other people that want to use it for example, companies or maybe hospital clinicians, etc., etc. But the idea is it stays an open research, open tool
for research.
Exactly. But yeah, so this is a good way to show that even though lots of things happen, COVID, illness, and changing country, I was still able to do what I was dreaming of, which was applying my research, keeping the research on. I still want to, there are so many things I want to explore with reward, but I also want to explore the impact on society. So how could dietitians use it for helping them with a diagnosis for their patients, and so on.
Pauline, you are really, really inspiring. I think that you're really, really inspiring. And, you know, I admire all the work, the effort you've put into it, not only into your work, but also having to deal with, you know, being a long COVID patient and actually, you know, dealing with that stress and actually being able to get the job and continue with your work. It's really, really inspiring. Thank you so much for sharing that story. And I think, you know, a lot of listeners of the podcast will, you know, are students who are doing as well, you know, their masters or their PhDs will really benefit from, you know, what you've been through. So thank you for that. And also, I think, you know, for other researchers who might be interested as well in probably, you know, like validating the LFBQ in, you know, different cultures and languages, if it hasn't already been done so, but to be able to sort of put on the platform as well, would that be like an idea of yours?
Of course. So basically the next step for me is first to develop this platform again, but finish it, fine-tune it, and make it open for science and researchers.
Yeah.
So that's the first step, developing, which I will be helped for because I love to code, but I don't develop app yet. So I will focus on what I know, which is research and methods.
Yes.
So first is doing the application. So first the online application. And then it will be to do what I like, which is finding researchers that are interested in using these methods to add liking and wanting in their research. And I think it's not to sell this tool against the other because there are lots of them that are important. And I think, as I said before, we should use them in the same time to see whether there are correlations or not.
Yes.
I think having these tools standardized is necessary so we can really compare between the Mexican, the French, the Spanish, whether we can say something from the humans or for the South or the North. So, you know, it's really important to have standardization to have the replicability in research. So yeah, I'm definitely looking for collaboration. So developing the cultural adaptation. So hopefully the Mexican, Portuguese, we are working already with Chinese and Spain and Danish. So there are some are already ongoing. Some I would love to develop with the researchers for their own work. So that's the cultural development. But also I'm interested in research project. For example, listening to your podcast, I was thinking it's never been validated with in twins.
Yes.
With genes and stuff like that. So would identical twins have the same reward for the food? That would be really interesting to understand.
Yeah, that would be really interesting. We have to have a little talk with a few people.
Exactly. So this, but also, in children and with diabetes or different pathologies.
Yeah.
And that's the second part, so that's the research part. And lastly, the last hat I will have is to apply it for dietitians. So I'm already doing interviews with clinicians and dietitians to see whether they will benefit from it. And the first feedback I had was that they were saying that having this tool that is friendly, quick and easy, 8 minutes or 6 for participants, they do it in their offices, and then they could see with a nice visualization what are they liking and they're wanting. And basically that could help diagnose. It could be a help to the diagnosis, like we use binge eating in the practice. We use other scale. This could be another one. Of course, we need to do research to see whether using this LFPQ in the practice really helps then with a diet or other stuff. But first, it could be as a diagnosis, and then it could be used as a way to change habits. And
yes, because you tailor it. You tailor the behavioral recommendations to each individual's variability.
Exactly. So that's the 3 things I want to do: developing the culturally adaptable LFPQ or high reward, as it will be called also from the startup, and developing more research in other area that we haven't pursued yet, and also putting into the practice. So basically helping clinicians in their own practice with this tool. So that's what I have in mind.
Well, that is amazing, Pauline. I think that, again, like as I say, you are really inspiring. I think that this is really amazing food for thought for a lot of people who would, not only to help with this work, but also maybe in their own ideas. I think you will be an inspiration to a lot of people who listen to this. So thank you, Pauline, a lot for sharing. I don't know if there's anything else that you want to just share and finish with.
I think I've already talked a lot, and because I'm still having long COVID, I'm gonna relapse after, so I may stop. But I wanted to thank you for this opportunity, because I miss communicating about research. That's something I really enjoyed. And also I want to thank my supervisors, that especially Graham Finlayson, who was the one that made me know food reward and inspired me to do all what came now. And of course, the startup that I'm in now, so my robotics, it will change name, but who is doing medical tool to measure taste and now pleasure. So yeah, no, I'm really grateful. I think the way I want to end it is saying that even though lots of drawbacks happen, which can sound really easy to say, but when things happen, there's always a way to see the positive sides. And and so for me, I'm really grateful to all the people that helped me achieve the professional and research project I had. So I'm really thankful.
Thank you, Pauline, again. And just, everybody who hears this podcast, if you think that there is anybody who would enjoy and benefit from this information, please share, and don't forget to like and leave your comments so that we can, answer any of the questions you might have. And I'm going to finish the way I do every podcast, which is, we continue to nourish each other. And through this podcast, hopefully we are doing that as well. Thank you again, Pauline. Really, what a pleasure. I'll leave your Twitter details as well so that people can get in touch with you. And again, thank you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. See you next time.
Bye.
Nos vemos en un próximo episodio de Alimentos y Emociones Podcast. Y recuerda, nos seguimos nutriendo.